For my immigration story, I want to talk about living Storm Lake. Since I was born and raised in California, then I came to Storm Lake. And then when I came to Storm Lake, I heard about there's like a lot of diversity. And then being in sports and like growing up in general, like the whole population has like, from back then when I was a kid to now, there has been a lot of diverse. And while being in Storm Lake, while in the school district, there's like a lot of in general of meeting like people from like Sudan, from China, from Japan, and there's a lot of diversity in Storm Lake. And then when coming to Buena Vista University as undergrad, I came here because of the Cultural Leadership Conference, which is held every year by the organization on campus, which target like students from diverse background, and they come from like all around the Midwest, from like Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, and like around like the Chicago area, to come and see how the campus is like and understanding more about like diversity in general from like different speakers, which is amazing. And then while being on campus, I also joined the Multi-Leadership Conference, and I've been helping build up that organization with Jorgen when he was the director of the Multi-Leadership Conference here. And for that, like I was a host, and I helped like students like understand like the concept, like how we have like diversity at Buena Vista University, which our campus is have like a whole bunch, and not many colleges out there that are like a private institution like ours have that much diversity.
So my immigration story starts with my mother. She was a single mother in Honduras. There were not very many opportunities for her, especially in the 80s, as a single woman with a child on the way. And she realized that she didn't have a future in Honduras. And at that time, we only had about only 2 members of our family, of our extended family, who lived in the United States. And she always grew up with this dream. She had actually been homeless for most of her youth, teenage years. She was homeless with her and her older brother and her younger sister. And so the dream was to come to America to have an opportunity. And so when I was 2, she decided to move to the United States and started saving money and cross the border. She didn't want to bring me along because she knew it was going to be a dangerous trek. It took her about a month and a half. It should have only taken her about a week and a half to make the trip from Honduras, because she was flying into Mexico and then crossing the border. But she was held prisoner by the Los Coyotes. And it was mostly because they were put in a house, and they were told not to leave this house after they had crossed the border in the United States. And they were in a safe house before they were being transported to California. And they were left in this house for about a week and a half. And there was 20 people in this house, and they had some children who ended up running out of food. And she decided, since the men were not stepping up and wanting to go and help and go get food, she decided to sneak out. Some folks gave her money. They went over and went to the store, came back with some food. A couple of days later, they knew that somebody had left the house, and everybody snitched on her. Everybody's pointed to her as being the one that escaped. So they told her that she had to stay, and everybody else had to leave. And then she ended up being in that house for an additional month. We had family members who thought that she had passed away crossing the border. And I get this. She told me this story when I was 10 years old because she wanted me to understand where we came from. Because at that time, when I was 10 years old, we had arrived to Iowa, and we had a great opportunity at life, a great opportunity at the American dream. But she didn't want me to forget where we came from. So she went through a whole entire ordeal. You can imagine the horrible stories you can imagine happened to her. I won't get into too much detail, but just expect the worst. Obviously, she was able to run away with her life, and got a hold of somebody in her home to let them know that she was alive. Became a migrant worker, and she qualified for the amnesty of the 80s. And through that, she was undocumented for probably no more than a year in the United States. And because of that amnesty, she was able to then move from California, spend some time in New York, and then eventually in Miami. And in Miami, that's when she wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to be with her. So it was about 4 or 5 years that I didn't get a chance to see my mother. So I come to the United States. I came here legally. I actually got a visa. It was a tourist visa for, I think it was only for 3 months. I overstayed my visa. And then I would not get my citizenship until 1998. So I wasn't documented for 8 years. My mother was going through the process of becoming a resident, became a resident in 1990, became a U.S. citizen in 96. I became a U.S. citizen in 98 because I was underage. She ended up getting married while she was in Miami, had 2 children born in Miami, and we ended up coming to Iowa in 1993. My stepfather was deported in 2003. He was also from Honduras. So from 2003 and on, our family became really close because I came back to live in the house with us so we wouldn't lose the house. All the money that we made was into making sure that we would support not only ourselves but also each other. My 2 little brothers grew up without a father because their father was deported. And despite the fact that we had 2 anchor babies, the fact that my two little brothers were born in Miami, that didn't help our family prevent the deportation of my stepfather. In fact, the judge was actually angry at my stepfather for even using my little brothers as a way to not pay for the crime of having crossed the border. So that really is, growing up, immigration is a very important issue for me because that's really where it comes from. It has affected us in that way where you think about a 14-year-old girl who had a dream of coming to the United States to have a better life, who lived on the streets in a third world country in Central America, to now owning a home and driving and living a middle-class family life. But that took a long time, 20-some years, 25-some years. I have family members who have come here legally, who've gone through the process of becoming U.S. citizens the legal way. We have people who've come here undocumented. We have family who have been deported, who have not seen their children for almost a decade. I had an aunt who lives with my mom who went 14 years without seeing her children. And all the money that she made, she was sending back to Honduras so they could get a private education in Honduras, so they could have an opportunity in life, at least to try to come to the United States or at least have a better life in Honduras that she was ever given. So we have family members who are kind of in the middle. We have some family members who are U.S. citizens. But it's been a long road, almost 20 years. And it's where we're at now. And I just don't want more families to go through that pain, that separation. My mother and my stepfather ended up getting divorced. And that's what happens sometimes. When you lose when you lose against immigration, you lose your life. You lose your self-being. You lose your family. And that's what happened to us. We lost our family, our nuclear family. But we survived, and we're going strong, and now we're getting into adulthood, and we all want to make sure that people don't have to go through that pain, don't have to go through those battles, because it dehumanizes you. It makes you feel like, what did I do to deserve to be born in this situation? What did I do to deserve to be treated inhumanely or to be dehumanized?
My story has to do going back to roots. My grandfather Ramon rode a horse up here from Sinaloa into Tucson, Arizona, and was part of the culture of Tucson in the state, developing it. And all of my mom and her sisters and my Uncle Ramon were all born in the States. And then I'm not a recent immigrant. I'm, like I said, the 2nd generation. That does not mean that one doesn't understand what is going on, because you hear stories when you're growing up from your grandparents, how things were, and my mom, what the schools were like. And I remember my mom saying, my brothers and I, all of you will learn to speak, read, and write English, or you will get nowhere in this country, and you will also go to school and graduate, so that you can have a profession and that you can be successful. So I think having those roots and going to Mexico and meeting my cousins who live there and everything, and understanding our history, which goes way back into Mexico. My ancestor was the governor of Jalisco. He was very instrumental in the history of Mexico. But I think understanding all of that, being sympathetic. I know Christian, he just left, he talked to you all. He's a younger person, he has a different story to tell. But all along there was discrimination when my mom's period growing up, and then even though I pretty much look like cousins in Mexico, I pass. I always told my older brother, I pass, you don't. So, but you're able to hear things and see things, and it's real important to speak up, no matter what you look like, because you have to stop these things. And I've given 34 years of my life to public education. So my passion was making sure that my Latino kids, were encouraged, and I would say even, I would push them, you got to succeed, and you will. And so that, I am very, very conscious of those, the things that are going on now. It's very offensive, the discourse that's going on when the Iowa Congressman King was talking about immigrants having, calves like camel. That hurts. That hurts. That's like thinking my grandparents are being talked about this way, my mother's being talked about this way. And so I think it takes all of us speaking out and making sure that folks that are in power know that this is a huge population in the U.S. and that they have a lot to offer, a lot to give, and you need to listen to us, because one day, I'm older, the younger people are going to have the voting block if they just get it all together and change things in this country so that things get better.
Well, I came originally from Mexico, country Mexico, about in 1989. I came here as a foreign exchange student. I arrived in Des Moines, Iowa, and of course going to Simpson College at that time as an helping with the Spanish department language, and also as a foreign exchange student. So that's where I met my husband, who happens to be also an American here from actually the East Coast, Boston, and we ended up staying in Iowa because at that time his father was a minister at the Methodist Church. So we were sticking around where his parents are. And I'm the only one that moved out of my family, so I ended up here because of my husband. Met my husband and we got married a year after we met. So ever since that, I have been here in Iowa, and it's not like Iowa. We moved from Des Moines, and here I am.
This immigration story will be about my grandparents. My grandparents were born in San Luis Potosí, and my grandfather rode with Pancho Villa. I have suspects that my grandmother, when they were coming from Mexico into the United States, my grandmother was pregnant with my father, who was Carlos Don Castro Dominguez. And so he was born in Los Alamos, Texas. So my father is a citizen. My mother was a citizen born in Oklahoma, and all of us children were born in Oklahoma. In 1929, there was a big explosion in Oklahoma, and people of many different ethnic backgrounds were displaced and needed jobs. C&H Sugar came in from Mason City, recruiting laborers. My father was the kind of man that I am today, active in politics and gathering people. So he formed what they call an enganche, and we know that an enganche is bringing a group of people together. So my dad got this group of people together, and they put us on boxcars, and they took us north to Mason City, Iowa. Then my father and mother became migrant workers. They worked in the potato fields, the onion fields, the corn fields, the beet fields. And the beet fields they worked at the winter time when it was time to go back and harvest the beets. We were on our way back from, I think we were on our way back from Buffalo Center, Iowa, and my father became very ill in Des Moines. And so he drove to the police station and said he needed help because my sisters and brothers and my mother, we were all in the car. Nobody drove except my dad, and my brother was just learning how to drive. So they took my dad to the hospital. He had a ruptured appendix. And we ended up staying in Des Moines, and I've lived in Des Moines since I was 5 years old, and that was in 1930-something that I was there. So I grew up in Des Moines. But the thing about that I want to bring forward is that we did work the fields, my father and mother did, and I was too young to work, but I was the little girl that took the tacos and the coffee. At the time that Big Ben said it's time to go, the alarm would go off and I'd go down and meet them on whatever part of the field they were at. I'd take the taquitos and I'd take the coffee, then I'd come back and I'd wait again because then I had another shift that I had to do. But in the wintertime, I always felt bad because my mother had to go back and top the beet fields, and beets weigh any place from 25 to 30, 40, 50 pounds. And I could always remember my mother grabbing the beets and chopping them off and throwing them in a big semi-truck. And we did that for a couple of years. But I never had to work in the beet field, just my brother and my sister. They never got to finish their education in high school, and I became the first one out of 8 children to graduate. But I can tell you that I think the migrants and the immigrants have built this country. And we worked hard. They worked hard. I can't say that I ever worked that hard, but I can remember my mother working many hard days out there. And that my grandfather and grandmother, they lived with us every year. On the 29th of December, we'd go to the United States Post Office, fill out a postcard that said that Inés Dominguez and Ventura Dominguez lived with their son, Carlos Castro Dominguez, at 450 Southeast Hillside, Des Moines, Iowa. And that's where my grandfather and grandmother died. My grandfather died at 96 years old. My grandmother died at 85. And that was my story for my immigrants, because I know that they suffered also, but they never had to go through what our immigrants are having to go through today. And I can't understand why we can't have that kind of comprehensive reform for people, and the people that were not able to take advantage of amnesty and other things that they should, because they didn't know about them. They were afraid, and I can understand that. But for 25 years now, I've taught people to become American citizens after having their residency. And I know a lot of the stories that they've had are really, really hard stories. But I'm happy that I'm able to speak to you today and tell you how I feel about immigration. Because in this country was built by the immigrants. This country says that we can come into this country and be treated equally. And I don't see that happening.
Well, I'm the pastor at Lakeside Presbyterian Church. One of the things we're doing in the community is Our Place, which is intended to be a place where all the different cultures and communities can come together, listen and learn from each other, share each other's cultures, and really build a true community. Ministry in Storm Lake is by definition multicultural. It's why I'm here. This is the smallest community I've ever lived in. It's also the most diverse community I've ever lived in. And it's just so wonderful to have all of those cultures able to intermingle. So at Our Place, we've had so far an Indian cooking class, a Hmong cooking class, and a Cuban cooking class. We've had an international film night. We've had films from Mexico, from South Sudan. It's just, to me, it's such a great resource and such a pleasure to see all of the different cultures, how they overlap, how they integrate. Last Saturday, I was at a family party for a new baby. The mother, Lao, the father from Guatemala, at the table. 3 languages spoken. Oddly enough, cilantro in all of the food. So the differences and the similarities are just wonderful.
I am a first-generation Mexican American, you would say. My parents and my older sister are both from San Pancho, Aguascalientes in Mexico. My mom crossed the border when she was 5 months pregnant with me. So I guess I kind of relate to that, like, wow, like I was 4 months away from kind of being in a really sticky situation. Since then, when I was 4 years old, we moved back because my mom gave birth to my little sister, and she, postpartum depression, she was by herself. We moved back to Mexico. My dad stayed here to work more. And then a couple years after that, she was alone again. So we decided to come back, and we've never gone back since.
So I was born and raised in Des Moines. My parents kind of passed the border, the river, when my mom was 18 and my dad was like 20. So obviously they came to the U.S. to have a better life for themselves and for their future kids. They've always, since I was little, they've always encouraged me to keep going to college, because if they would have had the opportunity to go to school, they would have gone to school. But because they don't have the opportunity, they want us to live the life that they would have wanted to live and have a better education and a better life for ourselves.
My aunt offered my mom to come to the States, but then we arrived to some cousin's house, like a distant cousin's house, and it was this really urban place. the town is called West New York, New Jersey, and we were like maybe like 10 people, 10 to 12 people in one apartment when we first got there, and it was a 1-bedroom apartment, and it's like really, really small apartments over there. So, you know, we were trying to find something as fast as possible to like move out, and eventually we ended up moving out of there. But it was kind of hard because from Ecuador to this, that transition was kind of hard for us because we had our own home over there. With, you know, my brother and I, we had our own room. We weren't, you know, well off, but we were living fine. We had our own space, right? So moving into this crowded, small apartment in, you know, this urban city was kind of like a downgrade for me. So I was confused about why my mom would come to this country to make us live in this, you know, in this way. And then also, like, one of the things that really shocked me was like going to school, because in Ecuador we had like all these green space, we had like soccer fields and all these fields for you to run around in school, right? And then when I came to West New York, the place where you will play was on a closed street. So they will close down the street for you to like play around, like kick up the soccer ball around or play tag. And then the school was just this old 5-floor building that was like really old, and like it was dirty, and like the streets were dirty, and I didn't understand why my mom would bring me to this country when everything from where we lived to where we went to school was not nice as it was in Ecuador. And then we went through this period, you know, of transition where I hated school, I hated where I lived, I didn't like the people. And in West New York, New Jersey, there's more Latinos, so that everybody spoke Spanish there. And you have like corner stores, bodegas, where, you know, you go buy like your local food, like, you know, you find anything there. But I found that like it was like dangerous to like just talk to people there. Like people over there were just more aggressive as compared to like here in Iowa. I can compare that now because I live here now. But she always told us not to talk about our documented status. She always told us that if we saw the police to just, you know, go the other way. So basically that fear of the police and that fear of disclosing our status was instilled in us since the very beginning. So, and then over there, everybody asks, like, if, like, bluntly, everybody just asks you, like, oh, where are you from? Oh, like, do you have papers? You know, it's not like that here, but over there it is like that. So, that was something that my mom always taught us not to do, to disclose any information about how we got here, if we took a plane or not. And which we did. We arrived in a plane and we stayed over a visa. So we are technically what's called visa overstays, and that's how we became undocumented in this country.
I came to the United States in 1999 with my husband, who had a specialist visa. His family had a large manufacturing company that had expanded to the United States, and we came here to work with the company. When we came to the United States, I had 4 children, ranging in age from 7 to a 6-month-old baby. And I was a dependent on my husband's visa, and I remained a dependent on his visa until I received my green card, which took almost 6 years. After receiving the green card, we went through the citizenship process, and overall, I would say that what we learned about the immigration procedures and the laws and the check marks to become a citizen, we learned that it's a very, very difficult process. It's very time consuming. Absolutely, our journey was perfectly documented along the route that most people who become citizens through the legal route go. We learned that it's not possible to achieve citizenship without the help of an immigration attorney, and the fees associated with applications and attorneys. So our process was about 12 and a half years total, and it cost $78,000 in order to have the honor of being an American citizen. And I'm very happy that I had that opportunity, and I love being an American citizen. I teach in an American university, and my children are all American citizens now. However, because I live in a community that has many newcomers, I'm often confronted with opinions and biases about why there are so many individuals who don't choose to go the legal route. And my own personal experience has shown that the legal route is actually very restrictive and it's very complicated. And today in the Unite Iowa Forum, we heard about policy reform for immigration. And even though I had a very successful experience, and I'm very honored to be part of the journey and to count as an American citizen, I know many people that come from situations very similar to mine that would not have been able to afford that process. And because of the dynamics of their family unit would not have sustained with that length of time that they had to wait to get through the process to immigration.
So I came here when I was 9 years old with my mom. We came over on a visitor's visa, but then we overstayed. So currently, my mom's undocumented. I'm documented. So we've been here for 15 years. We came here because we couldn't afford the living in Mexico anymore, and our education wasn't the best at that time. And there was also some civil war going on in the south of Mexico during that time. So we've been here since 2001.
I am an immigrant from England, and I moved over here 17 years ago, from August 24th actually, so very recently, was our anniversary. But it was really easy for me because I was 3 years old, and we moved over because my father was actually asked to come to an organization, Mayo Clinic Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota. And so I think I have never really thought of myself as an immigrant because I immediately got a permanent resident card. It went really smoothly for us because we had this organization that wanted my family to be there because of the services that my father had to offer. And so the only reason that any differences came to my attention was because I had a bit of an accent. And that was the only thing that made me feel different from other people. And I feel that for me, it's always been weird. Oh, there's an issue with immigration, but why was it okay for me? You know, I'm an immigrant. Why have I had it so easy? You know, I've been able to get a job really easily. I've been able to get into education really easily. And yes, I do come from an English-speaking country. And so because the primary language in this country is English, maybe that's made it a little bit easier for me. Also, the United States has a very good relationship with the United Kingdom, so maybe that's made it easier for me. But I wonder why. I mean, I guess I'm veering away from my story now, but I was just thinking, like, I always thought, why is it that, you know, someone just because their country doesn't happen to have that relationship, just because, you know, they don't have the same circumstances as me, why do we single them out, you know, as being so different from us? Because we're all humans. We're all born into different circumstances, and that's fine. You know, people in the United States were born in bad circumstances as well, and they had to deal with that in different ways. And maybe their story wasn't being an immigrant, but it was something else. And so we have to recognize these things in people. And that is why I'm interested in it, because I'm an immigrant and I'm fine. Well, you know, other people aren't.
My immigration story is kind of complicated, I guess. So I first came to the U.S. from Venezuela when I was about 11 or 12. And I came with a visitor's visa and then with a student visa. But then due to my father passing away and then other political issues, I went back for high school. I finished high school in Venezuela. But then I felt like part of my identity really formed here, so I always wanted to come back here for college. So I came back when I was 18 for college. Then again, more political issues in Venezuela, had to go back. And so in Venezuela, I studied, went to school, worked, and then I just saw that there weren't as many opportunities there as I thought that there were going to be, and the crime issues and the political turmoil started getting really bad. So I decided that maybe I could apply for another student visa and maybe finish those little credits that I had begun back when I was 18. So I came back in 2008. I finished an associate's degree in Michigan, and then I transferred to South Dakota State University. And I graduated there with a bachelor's in global studies and French. And then I got a job with an organization here in Iowa called Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement. And they sponsored my work visa, which was the H-1B visa, which is, it lets you work, but kind of ties you to an employer. Same thing how the F-1 visa ties you to your school. You have to maintain status. And then in the meantime, my brother, my oldest brother, Hector, also came. He's a doctor, and he was able to go through his immigration process in a different way. My mom, Mirna, still lives in Venezuela, and then my other brother, Jorge, he lives in Lithuania. So we're kind of spread all over the world. And then after that, I worked with Iowa CCI as a community organizer with the Latino community, and really got to hear a lot of stories, a lot of abuse that was happening to especially Latinos, but to a lot of immigrants just because of their undocumented status, or even if they did have status, just because they didn't really know their rights or anything like that. Saw a lot of issues of wage theft, people being really scared of the police, of reporting anything due to their immigration status. And then also feeling like if I ever got laid off or anything, I would also be deported too. So that was a stressful situation, having to deal with what other people were going through and helping them, but then also thinking about my own situation. And after that, well, I met my husband here in Iowa, and we got married, and then he was able to sponsor me, so I changed my status from being a skilled worker to being a permanent resident. So immigration to me is, whenever I hear so much discussion about it, people don't really know how much money and time and effort it takes to do it, quote unquote, the right way. And I'm 100% in solidarity with people that, for whatever reasons, whether it's extreme poverty or violence or whatever the reasons are, that they cannot go through those legal channels, and they choose to come here to support their family. So it's something that I'm really passionate about, especially because I have gone through the immigration system. And even now, I'm still about 3 or 4 years away from becoming a U.S. citizen. And for example, my brother, who is a doctor, he's also about 3 or 4 years away, and it's taken him 12 years to even get there. And my mom is still in Venezuela, and there is no way for us to bring her here other than having her overstay her visa or something like that. So it's a really unfair system. And here in Iowa, I really appreciate the community of immigrants and of activists and people who are fighting on this issue. And I hope that in whatever way possible, I can also be part of that community of immigrants fighting for justice, really.
My dad immigrated to the United States, and he was around 18, 17 at the time, and he just came to the United States, and around 20 he got married, and then he began the process of getting visas for myself and my family. My dad, during his time, I believe it was in 1916, under, I believe, Donald Reagan, he became a U.S. citizen. And through that, he was able to begin the process for us to become residents or to get visas. In 2001, myself, along with my sister and my mother, we came to the United States. We arrived to Rock Island, Illinois. My dad had transitioned at that point from California to Illinois, as well as other family members. So we established ourselves in Illinois in 2001. And my youngest brother was born actually here in the States in 2004. And since then, we've just been here in Illinois, trying to make a living and, just trying to live day by day.
I started second grade, right? And here I am, new student, and what's gonna happen, right? So I started with, I wanna say 3 Latinas in my class. And I didn't know any English. So it was very tough. It was very, very, very hard. I remember crying every Sunday before school started. Why am I here? Why am I here, right? And I'm pretty sure you've heard this a million times, right? But I think those things help you grow at the same time. And as a family, our father always told us, and our mother as well, like, we want the best education you can get. So I think that always stuck to us, and that's why we continued to be better people and understand the culture. But it was hard to do that in the sense that we also had a lot of discrimination. And I know my father and my mother, when they would work shifts, long shifts, they got discriminated for who they were, right? And we couldn't do anything about it. And I think that was the frustrating thing. Or even being in school, we always got discriminated. Where are you from? Where are you really from? That was the biggest question we always were asked. And not knowing any English, having some sort of accent that affected us in a lot of ways. So even getting a job, it was like, oh, where do you work? Well, we can't work in a place to speak English, correct? So we had to work in restaurants and all these issues, And so it was a very hard transition. I think being unknown of the circumstances and not knowing what to do. But I feel like at the same time, this is why it's so important to learn where you're at and grow from those experiences.
In 1633, my ancestor came over from England and settled in Lord Baltimore's colony. And he came over as an indentured servant and had to work 7 years. And then he was probably given like 100 acres of land to farm or whatever in order to develop the colony. The Native Americans considered my relative an illegal immigrant when he landed on the shore. So I can appreciate the immigrants or people's problems today, that he was going to be living in a very, very primitive area, and it was probably a great struggle to stay alive. And the immigrants say that come up from South America, the struggles they have, they probably can't speak the language, they don't know the customs, and so I can appreciate the difficulties they face.
Both of my grandparents came to Iowa in the 1800s, and they fled the revolution. And my father was born in Topeka, Kansas, and his parents were migrant workers, and they worked the railroad. And my dad lost his eye when he was 17 working on the railroad, so he had to go back to working in the fields. And he didn't really care for his father because his dad used to come home inebriated and start beating the family. And my dad was the oldest son, and when they were little, so when he got old enough to drive a car, when his dad came home, he piled everybody up in the car and they took off and left him. And they ended up in Minnesota and picking in fruits and stuff. And when World War II broke out, the brothers that were old enough to go join the service, my dad lost his eye. They told him to make it to Chicago and work the factories. So my dad made it to, he was given a contact name in Davenport of the Berrigan family. And he found him, and they took him in, and he worked and saved up enough money to go the last 190 miles, and Interstate 80 wasn't there then. And so then he and his friends went down to the Mississippi River to drink some beer and relax, and that's when my 16-year-old mom and her sisters were swimming, and I was born in Davenport. So they got married, and then we lived in Cooks Point, and Cooks Point in Davenport at that time was the Mexicans lived on the west end of town, and the black people lived on the east end of town, and everybody else lived in central and up the hill overlooking the Mississippi River. So, but my dad knew this guy in Buffalo, Iowa, about 20 miles south of the Mississippi River, that this guy sold him an acre and a house. And so I remember I was 5 years old, and we drove down to Buffalo in our 49 Chevy car, and we drove up this dirt road, and my dad turned into his cornfield, and he said, "There you are, Mother, you're near home." And we could see the roof of this house in the cornfield, and my mom started crying, "I'll never see my mother, she's so far away." And it was only 20 miles, you know. And then almost 50 years later, you know, my mom, you couldn't get her out of that place. I turned 18. I went to high school in Assumption High School in Davenport, and I chose Assumption High School because I knew if I went to a public school with all my friends that I would get in trouble and really end up on the wrong side of the tracks. So I asked her if I could go to Assumption High School, and she was so happy. But we didn't have the money for the $125 a year tuition. So I cut grass in the cemetery and the church, and I cleaned the gym 3 times a day, the morning and noon and after school. So that paid for my meals and bought my school clothes. And then when I turned 18, I joined the Marine Corps. I went to Vietnam, and I did 3 tours, and I spent 50 years in California. Okay, but part of that was in the service, and I was at base, and then I was like 18, getting ready to turn 19, and I was out of boot camp, and I was at my duty station, and I was at the bathroom. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and here comes Corporal Botello from Texas, and he's drunk, and he starts talking to me in Spanish. Okay, so go back a little bit. After my dad got beat up in the 3rd grade because he couldn't speak English, the teachers beat him. They were going to beat the English into him. So he said if I ever grow up and get married and have kids, that we would just speak English, knowing that we weren't going to go to Mexico. This is where we're going to stay. Now, backtrack again, I'm 18, and Corporal Botello came in, and he was talking to me in Spanish, and I said, "I'm sorry, Corporal, I don't speak Spanish." And then, bam, he hit me and dropped me. And then when I was like knocked out, but he kept hitting me and kicking me and hitting me, and now my face was all bloody and stuff. Then my squad leader came in, and he saw my tattoo. He said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm going to teach him how to speak Spanish." Anyway, so then he beat him up and said, "You ever touch one of my men again, I'll kill you." Okay, and I said, "Thank you, Lord." I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. Okay, so now I'm going to kill this guy. Okay, so I started lifting weights, and I weighed 137 pounds to 188 pounds, and angry. And I woke up one day, and he got transferred in the middle of the night. I never saw him again. But I kept lifting weights, and I was angry all those years. And then one day it just left me, okay? So I'm going back and forth, but soon after that, we were going through leaving Iowa. We're going back to California, and it was my first wife and I, and so the daughters weren't born yet. And we get to we leave Oklahoma, we get to Amarillo, Texas. Okay, this is in the early 60s. And we're sitting there, and the panhandle is only 195 miles wide, if it's that. So you fill up your tank of gas and you can make it all the way through. But we stopped, it's early in the morning, and I said, oh, this must be a good place to have breakfast, because look at all the trucks in the parking lot at this cafe. So we walked in, and they saw me. And then all the guys just stood up with their forks like this, and they stared at me. And these were all cowboys, farmers. And then the cook comes out, and it's his cafe. And he says, we don't serve Mexicans in here. And then everybody just stares at me like this. And I said, good, because I didn't want to eat one of them. And then half the guys were laughing, and the other guys are staring at me. And I guess, I'm going to go to Two Come Carry, and I'll eat with the Indians. I'll see you guys later. So I walked out, okay? So I just took off. I left. We're starving to death, but I'm not going to get anything to eat in there, okay? So this went on and on and on and on. So all these years, I did not let anybody intimidate me, anybody. Years later, my wife and I now, her sister and her husband, he wanted to go see, this a couple years ago, he wanted to go see his family and on the other side of Yuma, Arizona, in Mexico. So I said, oh, I know where that's at. It's about 4-hour drive, 4.5-hour drive. And he said, I'll rent a car. I goes, it's quicker for me to take you. So the four of us jumped in our truck. It's a crew cab, a 4-door. We took off. And about 4.5 hours, we got to Yuma, Arizona. We crossed the border. We all had our passports. And on the way down there, we have to cross El Centro, okay, on Interstate 8. You go to San Diego, hit Interstate 8, and you go east. And I pointed over, and I goes, oh, look. I said, there's an ICE station that we have to cross when we come back, because when you go to the border check, there is no on and off. You have to go to it, okay? So I said, well, stop there. No big deal. So on the way back, it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning. So we slowed down. And it's there are sandbags now. And these guys are camouflage. They're dressed in camouflage, and it's like, and it's almost like, wearing the bandana over their face. And so, it's the terror. They want to inflict terror on you. And fear. So I rolled my window down, pressed the button, and it's going down, and I just ready to say, good morning, sir. How are we doing? And then there's a Mexican dude, and he was the ICE. There's no more highway patrol on the border. It's all ICE. No, you'll never see a highway patrol in there. They all got promoted to ICE. So when I said good morning, and he yells out, proof of citizenship! He's screaming, and then everybody wakes up like this, whatever. And then my wife is sitting next to me, her sister and her brother's in the back seat, and everybody just like this, we're screaming, okay. And then I went, what the? You want what? I said, I'm screaming now back at him. I said, you want what? Oh, excuse me, sir. I'm sorry. I said, you caught me off guard on that one. I said, you took me by surprise. And then I turned around, looked at Inez, and she handed me all 4 passports. And I went to hand it to him. He goes, oh, that's okay. You can go. Okay. So that's what it is fear. And I won't bend to those guys. I don't bend. I guess whatever. And I'm going to get my ass kicked one day. So, but and I think it's because, of me being born here, my education and my military background. I'm not going to back up. I guess whatever. So, but the thing is, I can see fear. And if you are here, and not knowing the rules and regulations of here, and fear will take you. Fear will take you. And that's what we live in. So if they can control us with fear, they've won. Okay, and that's what some of this is all about. End the conversation.